Welcome to Conversations with Consequences here on EWTN Radio. I'm your host, Mary Fioravito.
And I'm Ashley McGuire.
And we're thrilled to have Curtis Martin with us today. Curtis has been at the helm of Focus, such an amazing resource on secular college campuses throughout the country. And we have seen such a surge, an uptick of so many young men and women coming into the Catholic Church. And so, Curtis, we're really excited to speak with you about that today. And thanks for making time for us.
Mary and Ashley, great to be with you. Excited to be with you as well.
So the big news, though, before we start, we have to get to our new Holy Father, who I would like to, as the resident Chicagoan of this podcast, to point out is a Chicagoan, Pope Leo XIV. And we would love to get your reaction to the news. Were you in Rome when it happened, or were you with some of the Focus students? How did you find out?
Yeah, so I actually had been in Rome during the interregnum. So after the Pope Francis had passed away and before Pope Leo was elected, which was an odd time to be in Rome and no Pope, I then flew home and the conclave started. I was actually at an ecumenical conference with primarily evangelical Protestants, and it was very fun because they were developing these great relationships, and all of a sudden at this gathering of hundreds of Protestants, the cry comes out, "White smoke!" And so it was very fun. And I will tell you, wow, that they would have been able to elect Pope Leo in barely a day. That more cardinals voted for this pope than ever in the history of the world. More cardinals from more countries than ever in the world. What a great moment this is. And literally, I've been watching, I think we all have, only impressive things all the time from Pope Leo. It's been so fun to watch. I'm filled with hope and energy.
You know, Pope Francis was very much a missionary pope, and it seems that we know that this pope spent decades as a missionary in Peru and is clearly, has a missionary's heart. He's an Augustinian, he's a canon lawyer, but he clearly also has a missionary's heart. And this is near and dear to your work. And you wrote very eloquently in a piece for the National Catholic Register, a son of St. Augustine and a shepherd formed by years of ministry in Peru and the Americas, Pope Leo XIV carries forward the legacy of those before him with a voice both bold and tender, challenging us all to be missionaries, faithful to the gospel, without fear. What do you see as working in missionary ministry yourself, having a pope who himself lived the missionary life?
Well, I'm going to answer that question, but let me go a little bit deeper. I've been blessed to serve first Pope Benedict and then Pope Francis on what was called the Council and then eventually the Dicastery for Evangelization. Years ago, I was invited to a meeting, two of them in a row. The first one was in Rome. The Holy Father was there. Pope Francis was there. The next year we met the same group. The Holy Father was not there, but we were in Mexico City at the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe. The overwhelming impression of this international gathering back to back was that the world was waiting for the Americas to catch fire under the banner of Our Lady of Guadalupe. The church has elected a North American man who spent most of his adult life in South America. This guy could be the answer to that prayer. I mean, it's unbelievable what could be happening right now to see this man of mission who has the gifting, the ingenuity, the entrepreneurial drive that North America is known for, but the family love, the great sympathy, the great devotion that Latin America is known for, and to be able to take this gift back to the rest of the world in various ways is something that we're really, really excited about. I think we'll see, but I mean, it looks like he's ideally chosen for this moment in history to bring the gospel to the entire world.
Well, Curtis, as I mentioned at the outset, there was a surge of younger people coming into the church this Easter. And what's very interesting about this Pope, and others have made this comparison, is, he's youthful and very interested just personally in sports. There's a lot of clips here in Chicago of him at the Chicago White Sox games, by himself with a jersey on watching them. And he's received some professional tennis players from Italy yesterday. How do you think that might impact young people on the college campuses that you serve? Because probably many of them, since the time they were born, have only kind of seen older popes, which is a very beautiful, I think, example and witness too of how we treat our elderly. But what do you think that this particular new moment in the church is going to look like?
No, I think it's a great question. And obviously the Holy Spirit and the Holy Father will determine how he chooses to lead. But I think it's a unique moment. I mean, there are now research articles coming out even before the election that the growth in the church right now in the first world is primarily young and primarily male. That these are young men. This was a group and is a group that has had a lot of trouble. I mean, young men are wildly distracted by online gaming, by online gambling, by online pornography. I mean, I work with this group and have for decades, and trying to get these people to Christ, men and women, and then get them on mission is probably our biggest job other than our personal holiness. And to see now this growth in both young men and women but with men slightly leading the way is an extraordinary change of direction. And I think to have a Pope Francis was wonderful. His spirit for the poor, his spirit for evangelization was great. But I will tell you, as an American who speaks only English, there was always a language barrier. Obviously, that's not going to be the case with Pope Leo. And so he understands, I think, both the culture and the language of the United States. And I think that there's a great gift that we have to offer, and not because we're better, not at all, but there is an entrepreneurial attitude and a generosity in the United States that I think could be unleashed around the world with great cultural sensitivity to the other nations and cultures. But to be able to take that energy under his leadership is an unbelievable opportunity. And I think that young people are going to resonate. I mean, everybody I'm talking to, and these are hundreds of people in the last week, everybody seems to be enthused. Everybody's filled with hope, both young and old, Catholic and non-Catholic.
What do you think is driving this explosion of youthful conversion and just youthfulness of the church in general? It's so noticeable. You look at any story about the Eucharistic pilgrimage, the Sikh conference. I mean, those were stunning images. And just this past Easter Vigil, picture after picture in my social media feed of Easter vigils just crammed with young, Orthodox, vibrant, excited Catholics. Probably you more than anybody have experienced this firsthand. What do you think is driving this, especially here in the United States?
Well, I do believe that God has granted me a front row seat to watch him work. I feel a little bit like Moses. I'm an old guy. He let the Israelites go into the promised land while he stood and watched. But I have been able to be close. And I would say this, first of all, God's grace. So God deserves all the credit. But I think in an odd sort of way, we actually have to pay a compliment to the devil. The devil has overplayed his hand, which he has to do because he's so prideful he can't not overplay his hand. And so he's destroyed this generation of young people in many, many ways, but he's pushed them so far that they're miserable and they're willing to look anywhere. They're like the prodigal son when he, quote, returns to his senses while he's in slavery in a foreign country. And he says, even my father's hired hands are better off than I am. And I think what we're seeing is a cultural returning to the senses. And here we've got a church who is poised, maybe better than any time in my life, to be able to welcome people all over the world in many, many cultures. But there's not just cultures that are traditionally defined, Asian cultures and Latin American cultures, but we also have very interesting called youth culture, and young people have been taken away for the last, I would argue, 50, 60 years, the sexual revolution and now the online world, but they've been taken so far by the devil. These people are wildly unhappy. Articles 2 years ago were being written about their depression rates and suicide attempts, and that's all still true, but they're turning and looking for mercy and light, and it's the church's great moment to bring the one thing, the only thing that can satisfy, and that's Jesus Christ.
Curtis, I have two college-age daughters right now, and when I talk to my friends and peers, one of the most common concerns, if not the number one concern, is children who drift away from the faith when they're in college. What advice would you give to a parent who comes to you and says, I don't know what is going on. We never ever missed Mass on a Sunday, and now my son or daughter doesn't go?
Well, first of all, I think it's one of the great tragedies in our culture. Probably for the last 50 years has been a shift. The institutions that we used to be able to trust either are not trustworthy or they're not sufficient. But either way, it's not getting the job done the way it did 100 years ago. And so my quick thing would be, first of all, obviously we want to take our kids to Mass every Sunday, even more often if we can. But what is lacking, Christian Smith, who's a wonderful sociologist from Notre Dame, actually knows youth culture very well. And he said, parents that are having spiritual conversations with their children are raising children who, when they're adults, will practice their faith. So for example, my wife and I have been gathering every Sunday. We've still got 4 kids at home. We've got kids that live in Colorado with us, but we also have kids that are in different states. We gather on Zoom as you and I, or as we all are gathered today, every Sunday, just for 45 minutes. We've been discussing how do we practice the Lord's Day. Recently, we've been reading a wonderful book on the Jubilee, and we just get together and talk. These are spiritual conversations, not political conversations about the church. Those aren't life-giving. What are the great things of the saints? What are the great things in salvation history? And there are great tools to facilitate these. So I would say that's the first thing. We can do this at home without it. But secondly, don't send your child to a Catholic school that has not embraced the church's teaching. The document is Ex Cordia Ecclesia, written by St. John Paul II. If the campus isn't even trying, they will not hit the mark. When you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. So go to a Catholic college that embraces its Catholic identity, or go to a non-Catholic college that has a great Newman Center. And it's not just focus, St. Paul's Outreach, Catholic Christian Outreach, they're doing some great work, but make sure the Newman Center's on fire. Go meet the chaplain and introduce the chaplain to your son or daughter. Make sure that handoff is done well, because what we're learning is really in the first few weeks, maybe in the first week, if the church doesn't make that engagement, they are awash in the secular culture, even on Catholic campuses, that are just pulling them away. And that's a devastating time to be away from the sacraments. Your young adult habits are being formed. And so we want to reach them for Christ. And I would only say, Mary, recognize the drifting probably started long before they went to college. It really starts when we hand our young people a cell phone. And already the culture's coming at them hard, and we're not prepared. And so we have to recognize by the time focus gets to them as freshmen in college, they're already at least half-hearted and half-minded when it comes to Christ, and we have to win them back. And so we really need to do everything we can to relationally and intentionally be faithful to the church's teachings, be faithful to the sacraments, and just love our kids very, very practically. And it's a winning battle. We see the recipe work over and over and over again. But unfortunately, we just don't have enough people on mission right now. So we're still missing more than we're catching. And so we've got great hope, but we've got a lot of work to do.
One of the things Focus is known for is marriages. I just keep hearing about young marriages coming out of Focus, and my kids are younger, but this is starting to become one of the things I worry about is, how are my kids going to find other faithful Catholics to form families with? Is that true? Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, tens of thousands.
Wow,
And it's
okay.
a game changer. It is an absolute game changer. I mean, we were just in Rome, as I mentioned. The rector of the North American College, Monsignor Powers, who's an amazing priest, was with us for dinner one night, and he shared that the incoming class at the North American College, 40% of those seminarians list Focus as a reason why they're pursuing the priesthood. 40% is great. I mean, we're serving literally less than 10% of the Catholic colleges in America. That 40% of those guys. So there's great stories about men pursuing seminary and the priesthood, and men and women pursuing religious life. But the real story, by the tens of thousands, are the marriages. They're marrying younger, typically. They're having more children, and they're staying married. And so we're seeing just this day and night difference. In fact, we're working with a gentleman, Brad Wilcox, from University of Virginia. He's an internationally known researcher whose expertise is the family, to actually go back now and really do some serious research on this. But I would argue that when we evangelize young people, and Focus is open to evangelizing all. Our fastest growth right now is actually in parishes, sending missionaries there. But when we evangelize college students, which we will continue to do, you get 3 generations for the price of 1. You win the college student to Christ, they go back and evangelize their parents, and then they get married and have kids. 3 generations for the price of 1. And it's a game changer, because it's not just that they're faithful and they're staying married, they're raising more children. Articles being written all over the world about how the birth rates are dropping all over the first world, but all over the globe. And that they just moved the number from 2.1 children per woman to probably 2.8 to actually replace. No place in the first world is above that. We don't know the data because we haven't done the research yet. But anecdotally, I mean, I could say I'm a father of 9. All of them are practicing the faith. I've got a VP who is a father of 6, another VP who's a father of 8, another VP who's a father of 8. We've got people on staff with 8, 9, 10 children, and we're now doing the research nationally. But these people, just think about their kids. Who are those kids going to compete with in a culture 30 years from now? They're not going to have any competition. The secular peers aren't having children. So we're going to flood the zone with faithful Catholics, and it'll swing the culture back in an amazing sort of way. Now, we can't take that for granted. We won't want to presume on that, but we want to recognize we're not just playing for wins today. We're playing to win 10 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now. And oh my goodness, there's so many reasons for hope. Things are going very, very well. And it's not just numerically, which is impressive, qualitatively. I would say that the fastest growing parishes here in my own home Archdiocese of Denver are being pastored by young pastors who were involved with Focus, or who were very close friends with other seminarians who were involved with Focus. And now they're pastors. They've been priests for 10 years. And we're starting, literally all over the Archdiocese, seeing churches that were about to be shuttered, Catholic schools that were on the verge of bankruptcy, now all of a sudden vibrant and full. This is super exciting, and we're just getting started.
And Curtis, one of the things that Focus is known for, obviously, is working with college students, and that's a great gift to the church. And, there was a series on First Things this month called Letters from Rome, which were different topics that writers were hoping the new Holy Father might take into consideration. And I was asked to write one, and I wrote on not so much marriage, but a culture in which good Catholics can meet each other. That's one of the great complaints I hear about young women that I mentor, is that they're having a really hard time finding a practicing Catholic male to marry. And I compared to what Orthodox and Hasidic Jews do, where they don't have arranged marriages, but they do arrange introductions for young people so that they can meet like-minded other young people because they would educate the sexes separately. So these kids need to figure out a way to meet. And if I could point to one thing in American Catholicism where it's kind of an anemic support structure, it would be in introducing young people to each other, but then helping them maybe 5 years into marriage when, a lot of the stressors start to peak. What would Focus be able to contribute by the formation you do in the college campus to address that particular problem?
No, Mary, thank you for your insights there, and thank you for the influence, because I know that your thoughts are very significant to other people. I only laughed that you said, well, are we with them 5 years later when the stressors start to come in? I've been married for 34 years. I think my wife would say the stressors are still coming in. But this is super, super important. And there are organizations like Young Catholic Professional that are amazing, but not nearly big enough. I would argue one of the reasons we're seeing so much success in Focus with regards to marriage and then family is because it's the Catholic Newman Centers are one place where you can meet like-minded people. I actually think as a father, I'm a father, half of my children are married, half of them are single. As a father of unmarried children, it's actually terrifying. Mm-hmm. Where are the spouses that love the Lord, that trust the church, that have devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, that are going to raise my grandchildren? And how in the world are they possibly going to meet them? Now, within Focus, we're establishing what we call communities of mission. So here's the very fun part. Notre Dame, I love Notre Dame. There's no criticism here. Notre Dame graduated or will graduate this month about 1,000 practicing Catholics, about 2,000 people, about half of them practicing Catholics, according to the stats. Focus this year will graduate about 15,000 practicing Catholics. Next year, Notre Dame will graduate another 1,000. Focus will graduate 18,000. We're a snowball that's growing. So these people are out in parishes. So we're building what we're calling communities of mission with our alumni, which are now approaching 100,000 people, and gathering them. But it's gathering them in ages. You may be in a parish with somebody who was in a vibrant Newman Center and lives 2 streets away, but they went to school 4 years before you. You don't even know them. By drawing them together, they're meeting one another and now befriending one another. Whether that's, guys being friends with other brothers and girls being friends with other sisters, or it's men and women meeting who might become brother and sister or might become, married couples. We've got to find a way for like-minded people who love Jesus Christ, who want to live counterculturally in a godless post-Christian culture and want to do so with joy. We've got to gather those people. And so communities of mission within Focus is really excited. We're getting off. There's more information. You can go to the Focus's webpage and get information there. We'd love to connect you. People of any age, really 22 to 45, that really 85, that we're trying to gather.
Well, Curtis, thank you. We could spend the entire morning talking to you about this, as is evident, but we need to wrap things up now. If you'd like to learn more, listeners, please visit focus.org, Focus, focus.org, if you would like to find more about Curtis Martin's really important ministry on college campuses, and to access the many resources he has there. And if you'd like to learn more about the Catholic Association, you can find us at thecatholicassociation.org to follow everything we do in radio, TV, print, online, and in our local communities. Thank you for joining us today.
Welcome to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Betsy Fentress, and once again, we welcome our resident chaplain, Monsignor Roger Landry, who is also the National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies in the United States. Monsignor, what a week. And we were both blessed and honored to be in St. Peter's Square. I just happened to be there to celebrate my 40th wedding anniversary on Sunday for the inaugural Mass. Give us your feelings and your impressions of that historic day.
Well, first, it was nice that you brought about 150,000 people to celebrate the 40th anniversary. That was great. Pope Leo has really shown that he is prepared for the papacy. He's very poised. He fits metaphorically his white cassock very well. He's made a lot of very prudent calls from the beginning in terms of what people's hopes would be for the Holy Father, to be able to continue the things that everybody appreciated with Pope Francis, and to correct a couple of the things that pretty much everybody, including Pope Francis' biggest supporters, were hoping to have changed, at least in terms of smaller little things with regard to clarity of teaching, with regard to order and organization in the Vatican, in terms of just tying things into the tradition of the papacy. And so he couldn't have started better. The Italians love his Italian. The Latinos and the Spanish love the fact that he's so fluent in Spanish. And how great is it that we have only the second pope of all time who was a native English speaker, and really the first in 800 years to be able to speak our idiom at this age, to hear him give, today we're recording this on Wednesday, to have him give his first Wednesday audience and do the summary in English like every pope does, with a classic American accent, with supreme clarity. We have had our prayers heard from God in a way that I think few of us would have ever expected.
It really is extraordinary that he speaks our language that's native to us, and it just makes you feel closer to him, don't you think?
It makes it much easier for us. Listen, in the United States, unlike other Catholic countries, we don't have a primate. For example, in Poland, there's a primate. So he speaks for the Catholic Church in the entire country. We have a first see in Baltimore, but nobody would think, if you really want to know what the Catholic Church in the United States thinks, let's wait to hear from Archbishop Laurie, as great as Archbishop Laurie is. Sometimes we would look to the president of the conference, but I don't think many Americans are looking to Archbishop Timbrolio to speak for all Catholics in America. Perhaps would look to St. Patrick's pulpit, and if you've got somebody who fills it like Cardinal Dolan, lots of people can take their indications from somebody who articulates the Catholic faith the way he does, but he's still not officially a representative of all Catholics in the U.S. Now, we have an American Pope who clearly is that sign and that instrument of unity, not just in the Church universal, but also in the Church on our shores. What an extraordinary gift that is. Pope Francis, everybody knows, didn't really understand the U.S. particularly well, and he didn't seem to love even our virtues like most others loved our virtues. Now we've gone from that situation where we're constantly trying to explain and defend ourselves to somebody who understands us from the inside. It's not that he's going to be a Yahoo from across the shore, blessing with both hands everything we do, but like when he compliments, he's going to be complimenting because he knows the strengths of his fellow Americans. But when he's got to criticize, he's going to criticize from within with greater attention to not unnecessarily offending. And so I just think it's an incredible gift that we have an American Pope. 2 weeks ago, almost nobody knew who Robert Francis Prevost is. Now he's going to be mentioned historically with George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. That's what's happened in the last 2 weeks for us as Catholic Americans, that we've now got somebody who's going to be in the American Hall of Fame, and he might come out historically as far bigger than both George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. I mean, we've got to be open to that possibility. And all I can say with that is the rich theological expression, wow.
So, what do you think he brings as an Augustinian to the papacy? You know, he starts with that famous quote, "Our hearts are restless until we rest in thee." But tell us a little bit of that Augustinian formation means for us as Catholics.
So just like Pope Benedict XVI, it means that Pope Leo XIV is thoroughly immersed in St. Augustine's thought. Even though the Augustinians were founded 800 years after St. Augustine died, everything was based on St. Augustine. And so he's going to be able to bring Augustine's genius to the lights and the shadows of the present world. That's the first thing it means. The second thing it means is that the Augustinians have been involved in two things: teaching, especially teaching the fathers of the church, the great early bishops and saints. And the second thing is they've been dedicated to the missions. And so he's going to bring first patristics to the papacy. So there's so much wisdom that most Catholics don't know. If you've been paying close attention, every one of his addresses has a father of the church now quoted. That's not by coincidence. He thinks with their thoughts. And so we're all going to be very much enriched that way. And then second, he's the first pope since Peter who's been a missionary before he was elected the pope. And so he's going to bring that great zeal to make sure that people all over the planet, especially the poor, especially those who are normally forgotten, are going to be able to receive the treasure of our faith in Jesus Christ. And so I think the whole church wins by his Augustinian charism. And then lastly, he had 12 years as the head of the Augustinians. And so he had lots of decisions he had to make, etc. And so he's going to be decisive because he had big decisions that he was making every day for 12 years. And that's beautiful preparation, not only for traveling as a pope has to do, but for the types of hard daily decisions about personnel and about policy and living and deciding according to the faith that has prepared him very well to be the 267th Peter.
Well, with you being at the Pontifical Mission Society here and the director in the United States, this has got to be particularly thrilling because I was looking at your website and you are at the service of the Pope in his ministry of proclaiming the gospel. So will you be working with him, Monsignor Landry?
So I meet him tomorrow for the first time.
Oh,
I'm here in Rome now after all the papal events, because at the end of May every year, all the national directors from all over the world come together to discuss how we're actually going to help the missions most. And tomorrow we're going to be received by Pope Leo. Each of us normally has a chance to meet the Holy Father at the end of his public remarks to everybody. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And when I meet him, having met 3 of the popes up until now and prepared hundreds to meet the Holy Fathers in my work at the United Nations, I already know what I'm going to say if I have a chance. And I'm going to ask his help to help me help him support his 1,124 missions. And there's something about prayer that I'm going to ask him, and there's something a little bit about fundraising. I'm convinced if Pope Leo were to just simply say in 15 seconds to my iPhone, brothers and sisters in the United States, thank you for all your prayers. I have now, as the successor of St. Peter, inherited the responsibility to care for Christians all across the world in churches that are too young, too poor, too persecuted to self-sustain. Will you help me? I'm convinced if American Catholics, with all their generosity, were to hear that type of direct appeal from Pope Leo, who already everybody loves,
Right.
I just think they would recognize, okay, I'm going to make this a priority for me, and we would be able to make an incredible impact together with Pope Leo across the globe. The Pope is always the chief missionary in the church, but he can't cast out the nets all by himself. He needs people in the boat to row. He needs people in the boat to steer. He needs people in the boat to take in those thick nets full of fish. And so that means you, Betsy, and me. That means all those who listen to Conversations with Consequences. It means almost 70 million Catholics in the U.S., in addition to our 1.4 billion brothers and sisters across the globe. And so I think it's going to be enormously helpful to me in my work, helping him in his work.
Well, we are really excited for you. Please come back next week and we can hear about your meeting with the Pope.
I look forward to sharing.
Thanks, Monsignor Landry.
God bless you, Betsy.
Welcome to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Betsy Fentress, and we have a very intriguing guest with us today, Marina Frederoli, who is a recent convert to the faith and also a recent convert of graduate school at Columbia University in New York. And we would like to talk to her about a lot of things today, but we're going to start with her very unique role as a perpetual pilgrim and joining our chaplain, Monsignor Roger Landry, on the National Eucharistic Pilgrimage. Thanks for joining us, Marina.
Thank you so much for having me, Betsy. It's really good to be here with you today.
I'm not sure where to begin. There's so many interesting things to talk about. You have a recent piece in the National Catholic Register on what you hope for in the next Pope. We're going to get to that. But can I just talk a little bit about your background? You grew up in Dallas. You're the youngest of 3 sisters. You were a devout, or your family were devout Presbyterians.
Mm-hmm.
So share with us a little bit about your faith as a child and as a teenager in Dallas.
Sure. Well, I would say that I had an active faith as a child and a teenager. I was really blessed to be with great parents who put me in Christian education. And so it was a big part of my life, I would say. We went to church on Sundays. I was able to integrate sort of faith and learning in my classes. And it was a really beautiful part of my life all throughout my childhood. And yeah, I'm super grateful for my Protestant upbringing. But Part of that education just like empowered me to like really dig into the faith and to know that there's answers to questions. And so that definitely planted seeds as my faith journey sort of veered towards the Catholic Church later in life. So
So you went to Duke University, and there you studied art history?
art history and religious studies, yes, a double
Okay.
major.
So during your religious studies at Duke, were you ever exposed to Catholic writers?
Ooh, that is such a good question. Very few, if any, honestly.
Really?
Well, I read the writings of St. Paul.
Okay.
Um,
He's Catholic.
yeah, yeah. But I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think. I read a lot of secular biblical scholars. I read um, I read a lot of people who sort of spoke about religion in American culture and
Hmm.
the way that America like embodies its like religious history. I read, scholars of Judaism and Islam and many different faiths, but I don't know if I don't feel like I really knew what the Catholic Church was when I graduated with a Duke religious studies degree. Because I sort of came in with my Protestant idea of what Christianity was, which did not have a big emphasis on the Catholic Church. So I wasn't looking for it, first of all. Um, but I actually in an art history class, I got to read some Catholic authors, particularly architects of the Gothic cathedrals, and that included some stories of saints. Um, but yeah, I was in my head it was medieval Christianity. It wasn't Catholic per se.
That makes sense. Yeah. So did you find it hard to be a visible Christian at Duke?
It was a big challenge for me, and it was something I very actively wrestled with because I would say the dialogue at that time, you really were not expected to bring any of your own religious convictions into the classroom. I would say that was not like sort of compatible with just the atmosphere. And so the classroom discussions, they kind of present, it was a secular space, I would say. And even the approach to religious studies, it was kind of like we are looking at religious people, but we are very separate from them and we aren't making judgments about them at all. And I think there's pros and cons to that approach, but
It's
um,
almost like you're studying anthropology.
yes, it's the field of religious studies, especially when I was at Duke, was highly anthropological, which it was cool for me who was raised in sort of a Christian bubble to learn more about what's out there.
Hmm.
But I would say there were absolutely limitations to that approach, and I think it also was a little bit biased against representation of the Catholic Church. Just because I think they were seeking to promote alternative perspectives, but ultimately that left out a really big part of the story of like world religions. So.
So after you graduated, then what happened?
Well, I graduated and I had already gotten into law school, but I decided I needed a bit of a break. So moved back to Dallas and I started working in the arts. I worked for a museum and an art fair in Texas. And then COVID happened. So as someone who worked for an international art fair, I was basically the first one to lose my job because no one was having an international gathering in April of 2020. And so that really pushed me onto the internet in a way I hadn't really been before. But I brought that sort of religious studies curiosity with me. And so I had spent a lot of time on the internet previously, um, kind of looking at religious communities, like looking at LDS Reddit groups. And so one of the things I discovered during COVID was Catholic Twitter. And that is actually where I began to understand the Catholic Church a little bit more, was just, lay Catholics in accounts, anonymous and otherwise, just sharing their faith. And that is really when I began to think about the Catholic Church seriously.
It's interesting you say that because I don't know if I'm quote on Catholic Twitter, but I do follow Catholics, some Catholics, and I did notice they would just somebody would retweet someone else that I didn't know saying, "So today I became a Catholic," or I'm going to become a Catholic. And it was just, and I think I got the impression that they were telling people on Twitter because they may not have known anybody else in their friend group or their family that they could say that and get this sort of crush of affirmation. Do you know what I'm talking about?
You know, you're describing my lived experience.
Really? Oh, good.
So yeah, I mean, personally, like when I got confirmed, I had one friend really from my history who was present at that confirmation. That day, I posted on Twitter and I got hundreds of comments and likes, and people who I'd been interacting at that point for a couple of years. But I would say I had a much more robust Catholic community online when I joined the church than I did in real life. Although I will say the Columbia Catholic Center was super helpful in me joining the church.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
So you were in Dallas for COVID. You discover the world of Catholicism online. So at that point, were you thinking, oh, I'm kind of like him or like her? Or were you still kind of in your religious studies, anthropological mode, just, like your Margaret Mead in Samoa or somewhere, trying to figure out what all these people are like?
Yeah, I would say it was critical, like a kind of we're looking at it through an anthropological lens until I heard about the Eucharist. And it was when I heard about the Eucharist that I was like, that it confronted me as a Christian. And I had to question, wow, like this is a really beautiful teaching. If it's true, I need to wrestle with this. And so, but I was confronted with that pretty early on, like within the first couple weeks of being on Catholic Twitter, did I learn about what the Eucharist was.
So by the time that you went to graduate school, were you thinking, I think that I might want to become a Catholic or not?
Yes, it was like, this is a possibility for me, although that also seems like a really big deal, and I don't know if I want to do that.
Right. Were you
Yeah.
going to Catholic churches in Dallas to kind of see what it felt like?
I went to a couple. So because I kind of learned about Catholicism on this very particular internet space, the first mass I went to was actually a traditional Latin mass. And it honestly was not the experience I hoped for. I don't I didn't know what I was hoping for. But that made me pause my experience. I was like, what am I doing? And then I did attend a couple sort of normal parish masses in Dallas. And then I moved to New York, and my plan was to start attending this Presbyterian church but it actually was hard to get to from my apartment. And I, meanwhile, had 5 Catholic churches walkable to my apartment. And so that's kind of how I started, was just the way that Catholicism is baked into the architecture and urban like design of New York. That made it much more a bigger part of my life than otherwise would have been.
I love that about New York. I love that about all really the big cities, the older cities, Philadelphia, Chicago, New York. I live in St. Louis for sure, San Francisco. It's amazing, isn't it? And then you go to Europe.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, some of them have been turned into museums, but I love your phrase, baked into the architecture. It's so true.
Yes.
Okay, so you get to Columbia, you think you're going to go to a Protestant church, but you end up going to Catholic churches, and then do you immediately get involved in the Catholic Student Center there?
No. So I kind of ping pong between churches. I'm not even going every single week because I'm also like experiencing my first year of law school. It's a tumultuous time, I would say. Also, COVID was still happening, everyone was masked. There was social distancing in New York. It was a crazy time. And even in churches themselves were not the social communities that they can be.
Right.
And so I would say I was intrigued, but I wasn't all in on my pursuit of Catholicism. And that changed when I had a random encounter with St. Teresa of Avila's autobiography.
It's a good one.
Yes, and I did the way it came into my life. I didn't know it was Catholic. I didn't even know why I was reading it. I just kind of felt drawn to it. And basically she wrote about her life. She wrote about like who she was as a child, and that was something that I loved. She wrote about navigating illness and pain like through a Christian lens, and I had never really received that kind of teaching. She wrote about how apathetic she had been in prayer, and how she had spent so many years not living her fullest spiritual life. And I was like, okay, like kind of relate to that too.
She's extraordinary. And do you know Edith Stein, who St. Teresa Benedicta? Do you know this story?
I do. Yes. It's been told to me since we have this kind of parallel.
Right. That she reads the book, that autobiography of St. Teresa of Avila, and she stays up all night reading it. And at the end, she says, This is the truth. I have goosebumps just retelling that story. And so, wow, you're the second person that I know that happened to.
I know, it's amazing. I don't have her reading comprehension skills to do it in one night. It was much more of a journey. But yeah, it was after that it all kind of clicked.
Did she say anything about the Eucharist in particular that really resonated with you, or was that something that you had already come to think that the real presence was indeed Jesus's body and blood?
So at that time, I had basically come to my own intellectual conclusion that the strongest reading of the Gospels has the highest Eucharistic theology. And I gained that perspective through a very close reading of the Last Supper narratives in particular. And just like from a literary perspective, I was like, wow, the Last Supper is a really important scene, and it's right before the crucifixion, which is obviously a very seminal moment in the life of Christ. And it's in all four gospel accounts. And these words are really like what the scene is framing, these words of consecration. And so if this were a novel, you'd say, wow, like everything's kind of pointing to this, and Jesus is pointing to this. And so those are not words to take metaphorically. Like those are the words you should take maximally seriously, and so literally. And so from my own sort of liberal arts lens of reading the Gospels, I was like, this points to a really high Eucharistic theology. And that's underpinned by John 6, that's underpinned by St. Paul himself repeating those words of consecration. And so from my own reading of the Gospels, which was, this very Protestant approach to the Bible, like my own reading, I
I
had
know. I always say, just let's read the 6th chapter of John together and talk about, unless you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, you shall not have life in me. I mean, it's so clear.
Yeah.
Okay, so you go to Colombia and you read St. Teresa of Avila, and then do you just convert while you're there?
So then I'm like, okay, I need to talk to some real Catholics. This year on Twitter has been super informative and, set me on this course, but that's when I connected with the focus missionaries at Columbia. And
Excellent.
it was amazing just to have clear ambassadors who I could take my questions to. And so that was a great gift. And yeah, I decided at that time, like, I'm going to join the church. Yeah. But
Beautiful.
then it was a journey. It was a journey. I ended up getting very ill at that time. And
Oh,
I was pretty ill. I got long COVID. Like, so a case of COVID really lingered in my system.
mm-hmm.
And so I tried to join. I did start OCIA in that fall, which was about 6 months later, but I was still quite ill. And so I was back in law school for a couple months before I realized I'm actually not, I don't have the faculties to do law school right now. And so I took a medical leave. And that was a big challenge for me, even spiritually, because I didn't want to drop out of my New York-based OCIA to move back to Dallas. But that was God's plan for me. And it ended up being this beautiful time looking back where I was just sort of like lifted out of a lot of my habits, a lot of my routines. While that was a very challenging time, it kind of like gave me a little bit of a blank slate when I was able to rejoin OCIA the next year and receive some really great Catholic catechesis and be very ready to accept the challenge of joining the Catholic Church.
You're like St. Ignatius of Loyola. He was wounded. He had his, I think, leg shattered and got stuck in a manor or a castle in Spain. And the only books were the lives of the saints. And he had been a pretty bad boy before that. So
I've not thought about that. That's a great
I
thought.
I love conversion stories. There no two are alike, and it's just proof of, God's mercy and grace and goodness. And so you met our esteemed resident chaplain, Monsignor Roger Landry at Columbia. And,
Yes.
and did he bring you into the church?
He did. He did. He led my OCIA and he organized my reception of the sacraments, which was beautiful. And yeah, I am grateful for his great catechesis.
Okay, so Marina, after that, how did you get involved? Well, I know how you got involved because you're friends with Monsignor Landry, but it's a big step to decide you're going to start in New Haven and end up in Indianapolis. So tell us your journey as a pilgrim and how long had you been a Catholic when you decided to do that?
Yeah. So one thing I didn't fully go into was what caught my attention about the Eucharist was on Twitter way back when was the words National Eucharistic Revival. And so those words really were the ones I was like, what is that? Like, what does that mean? And I Googled it. And that's when I re-encountered the word Eucharist after a really long time. And when and framed in the context of revival, it was really meaningful to me as a Protestant.
Mhm.
I just like so much coalesced when I did that research. I saw like, this is a central tenet of the Catholic faith. This is something that even the bishops are admitting, like, not every Catholic fully grasps. And that was all very helpful context to me as someone who had been to some masses before, had known some Catholics, though not, and so it made me have to wrestle with it. Like, like, what is this revival? Why are they doing it? What is the Eucharist? What are the implications of that really big claim on a Christian's devotional life? And so when the National Eucharistic Revival was launching this pilgrimage, it was really near to my heart already
Mhm.
because I thought that the National Eucharistic Revival was like really powerful for conversion because it like really set mine into place it initiated that. And so I knew it was going to be a big challenge because I was graduating law school and I have a lot to do with that, and with the bar and with working. But technically, the dates fit. Technically, there was not anywhere I had to be during the exact dates of the pilgrimage and then the Eucharistic Congress. So I applied, and I was so busy during that time that I honestly just I gave myself like an hour and a half to type out that application, to write all those essays. I'm just like, if it's God's will, He'll put me on this pilgrimage. But I wasn't able to like to really edit things how I wanted to, and it was just like I really left it to God, and I was accepted, and I prayerfully chose to do it. But it was a risk and it was a sacrifice. But it was absolutely not unrewarded. And I'm so glad I made that 65-day journey. What I witnessed in America during that time was, I would say, true revival. I saw people who were already faithful receive deep encouragement. I myself spoke to people, several people, many people, for the first time, the teaching of the Eucharist. And so I just saw so many people like kind of gain new life in their faith, and I saw so many seeds be planted, and I'm just so excited, yeah, about what happened that summer, and I'm excited there's going to be another pilgrimage this summer as well.
So were how many people like you started in New Haven and went all the way to Indianapolis?
Yeah, so there were seven, or sorry, numbers. There was about 6 young adults who were with me on the Seton route. At the same time, there were 3 other pilgrimage routes happening.
Right, right.
Because we each started in one of the 4 cardinal directions of the country, and we converged in the middle, making a cross and a cruciform Eucharistic benediction over the entire country, which is just so rich. And I'm just so grateful that that ambitious, beautiful idea happened. But yeah, it was me, 3 other girls, two guys, including a seminarian who were young adults. We had priest chaplains, including Monsignor Landry, and great CFRs, Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, who accompanied us the whole way. We had this incredible order of sisters from New Hampshire, the Daughters of Mary, Mother of Healing Love. They were with us as well. And then we had some lay people who just joined us. And that was an incredibly challenging thing to do because we had all of our arrangements, all of our driving that we had to do, it was all arranged for us. So the people who joined us, including those sisters, like they had to really work to keep up with the pilgrimage, and they did it, and it was just so blessed. Yeah.
So you bring so much joy and freshness to this teaching that we've had for 2000 years. And sometimes we need people like you to remind us of the treasure. And to that end, part of the newness of your faith would be that you have a Holy Father. And you've written an article about some of your hopes for the next Holy Father. Can you share some of those with us?
Absolutely. It was just such a privileged to be able to put some of my thoughts out there, especially as a convert and as someone in my 20s. Like I'm deeply humbled that that my words have been shared. But yeah, so I think the first thing I started with for my hopes for a Holy Father was someone deeply aware of his need for prayer. Because you know, this is the work of God. That's what the church is. The work of God, encountering every time with newness and with faith. And so someone who's humbly aware of his need for prayer was the first thing I think I said. And then I discussed my hopes for someone with a heart for unity, with in the Catholic Church, but also among all Christians, because Jesus himself prayed that we'd be one. So someone who has a heart after our Lord Jesus, for us to be one. I definitely made a point about this being in a moment of Eucharistic revival, and that I hope that this next Pope, he leads with the message of the Eucharist. And I said that in my piece in particular because I saw the ability of the Eucharist to bring so many people together and to unite amidst diversity. And that, you know, in the Eucharist, we all become one in this beautiful mystical mystery of partaking in the Blessed Sacrament. And so I think that, you know, we can't hide that light under a bushel. We must lead with it. And there's so many Christians like I had been who just don't know the teaching, who don't know this really beautiful gift that Jesus has left us and that the church has safeguarded for us, that is the Holy Eucharist. And so I really believe in the power of Jesus himself in the Holy Eucharist to provide for the church what it needs. So yeah, those were some of my prayerful hopes for the Holy Father.
Well,
Um,
they're good ones. Marina, I have a copy of your article in front of me, and one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was you wrote the church needs a vision of leadership that transcends the lures of political ideology. Is that something that you wrote out of your experience of being at two secular elite schools, or is it just from watching the news, or what brought your heart to write that sentence?
Thank you for that question. I would say honestly, the thing that was a little in my head with that was the film Conclave.
Ah,
And because I've had so many secular friends talk to me about that film. And I just thought that it really stripped away the spirituality of the church and the beautiful philosophical traditions of the church. And so I would say last summer it was an election period in the country. And I saw how a lot of, you know, people would ask me questions about what was going on with the pilgrimage. And a lot of times they would put it in political lens. And I think that that film put things in a political lens. And one of the things I wanted to communicate in this piece was what we have in the church is so much bigger than that.
mhm.
Like what we have in the church is so much more unifying. It's so much deeper in the human heart. It's so much more profound, and like it meets the soul and it's our very depths, and like our political differences, like that is a surface level problem in comparison with what we receive in the church and in comparison with what the true work of the Holy Father is.
Well, we're almost out of time, and I think that that's a great note to end on as we speak today, the first day of the conclave. And don't you love it though that the whole world is watching? I mean, I love being a Catholic, especially during these times of worldwide focus on who we are and people seeing everything from the pageantry of the Catholic Church, which is
Mhm.
beautiful. I mean, that's obviously surface, but so many of the rituals and clothing that the cardinals wear have deep significance. You know, the color of red is the blood of the martyrs, and um, so I think we will both enjoy watching uh, the chimney for the white smoke to come out.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for joining us, Marina. You are a real light in the world, and we feel honored that you shared all your thoughts with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll be praying for the conclave, and I ask you and all the listeners to join me in that prayer.
To learn more about Marina Frateroli, make sure to check out her writings at ncregister.com. That's the National Catholic Register. And to learn more about the Catholic Association, visit us at catholicassociation.org and follow everything we do in TV, print, radio, online, and in our local community.